Steven Seagal was known as a principled and respected businessman. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't play dirty games. His company was profitable, stable, and admired in the industry, not because of shortcuts, but because Steven believed in discipline, transparency, and long-term vision. But success attracts more than respect. It attracts greed. Behind closed doors, a few board members had grown impatient. They wanted faster money, more control, and Steven out of the way. They smiled in meetings, praised his leadership, while quietly plotting to take everything he had built. That morning felt normal. Steven was reviewing reports in his office when the assistant hesitated at the door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." Before Steven could respond, the door opened. A young man, barely 20, walked in confidently. Simple clothes. Clean face. Sharp eyes. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look lost. In fact, he looked too confident. Steven studied him calmly. "Can I help you?" The young man didn't sit. He didn't ask permission. He placed a thin folder on the desk and said, without hesitation, "Sir, I'm the new owner of this company." The room went silent. Steven raised an eyebrow, surprised, yes, but he didn't laugh. He didn't shout. He didn't call security. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, eyes steady, voice calm. "That's a serious claim," Steven said. Then he pointed to the chair across from him. "Sit down. Let's talk." The young man smirked slightly and sat down. And in that quiet moment, as papers lay unopened on the desk, one question echoed in Steven's mind. "Who sent you, and what do you think you've already won?" The young man didn't waste time. He opened the folder and slid it across the desk, his confidence growing with every movement. Inside were neatly arranged documents, official, stamped, and disturbingly convincing. "Ownership transfer deed," he said casually. "Signed and approved." Steven picked up the papers slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't react. The documents looked clean. Too clean. There were bank approval letters, corporate seals, even digital verification codes. Everything that should have raised alarms, didn't. Almost perfect. The young man leaned back, crossing his arms. "It's all legal. You'll see." Steven's eyes moved carefully across the pages. Then he stopped. The signature. He knew it instantly. It was his. Not a copy. Not a forgery. The stroke pattern, the pressure, the spacing, all real. But something felt wrong. Steven glanced at the date. The timing didn't make sense. The signature existed, but not there. Not then. Steven closed the folder gently and looked up. "Interesting," he said. The young man smiled. "I told you. This is already done." Steven studied him closely now. Not the papers, the person. No fear. No hesitation. Not even excitement. Just quiet certainty. Too much certainty for a 20-year-old claiming to own $1 billion company. "You seem very confident," Steven said. The young man shrugged. "Facts don't need confidence." Steven nodded slowly, hiding his thoughts. Inside his mind, pieces were already moving. Someone had access. Someone inside had helped. And someone believed Steven wouldn't notice. Steven leaned forward. "Where did you get these documents?" The young man's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, then steadied. "From the people who matter." Steven smiled faintly. That answer told him everything. Outside the office, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Voices. Laughter. Board members were arriving. Steven placed the folder back on the desk and folded his hands calmly. "Well," he said, voice steady, "this is unexpected." The young man nodded, convinced he had already won. And as the office door began to open, one thought crossed Steven's mind. If they think I've lost, then they've already made their first mistake. The office door opened without a knock. 3 board members walked in together, confident, relaxed, almost celebratory. Their smiles weren't friendly. They were calculated. "Steven," one of them said lightly, "we heard there was a discussion." Steven didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at them, then at the young man sitting comfortably across his desk. Perfect timing, he thought. The tallest board member stepped forward and placed his hands on the desk. "There's no need to pretend anymore. The ownership has legally changed." The young man's lips curved into a smug smile. So this was it. Steven leaned back in his chair, silent. The board members exchanged satisfied glances, mistaking his calm for defeat. "You built something impressive," another member added, almost mockingly. "But businesses evolve. Leadership changes. The young man finally spoke again. I'll need access to all executive accounts by end of day. Not a request. A command. Steven studied him carefully now. This wasn't a confused kid dragged into paperwork. This was someone trained, confident because he knew the plan. A pawn? No. An active player. One board member laughed softly. He's sharp, isn't he? We chose well. That single sentence confirmed everything. Steven realized the truth. This wasn't a takeover. It was a coordinated fraud. Yet Steven remained silent. The room filled with confidence, theirs. They spoke over each other now, discussing transitions, public statements, and next steps, as if Steven were already gone. The young man leaned forward. You can stay on as a consultant, if you want, he said, pretending generosity. Steven didn't react. To them, it looked like surrender. To Steven, it was patience. They believed the game was finished. They believed Steven had been outsmarted. They believed they had won. But Steven Seagal wasn't a man who fought battles emotionally. He fought them precisely. And as the board members stood to leave, confident, smiling, Steven finally spoke. Congratulations, he said calmly. Their smiles widened. None of them realized the truth yet. The real game had just begun. Steven leaned back in his chair, eyes calm, voice measured. The office was buzzing with confidence. The young man and the board members were convinced they had played the perfect game. But Steven had been thinking several moves ahead. He finally broke the silence. You think you've won, he said softly, but the truth is something you didn't anticipate. The young man raised an eyebrow, smugness still in his gaze. Oh? And what truth is that? Steven smiled faintly. The documents, the signatures, even the bank approvals, they all served a purpose. The board members froze, sensing the change in tone. 4 months, Steven continued, I suspected internal betrayal. I knew some of you wanted to take control, no matter the cost. So I created a trail, one that seemed flawless, one that could fool anyone who thought they were clever enough. The young man's confident smirk faltered. He leaned forward. Wait, what do you mean? I released a decoy signature, Steven said calmly. One that could be traced, monitored, and verified, but not in the way you thought. Every move you made, every file you touched, every conversation you had, all of it was being watched. The board members exchanged nervous glances. You wanted my company, Steven said, voice steady and commanding. I wanted your confessions. The room went silent. Even the young man's heartbeat seemed loud enough to echo. He realized, too late, that he hadn't been in control at all. He thought he was the mastermind. But in reality, he had been a piece on Steven's chessboard, moving exactly where Steven allowed. Steven's calm eyes swept the room, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. You believed you had fooled me, he said softly. But the truth never hides for long. And when it comes, it finds everyone, even those who think they are untouchable. The young man's confident posture stiffened. The board members' smiles disappeared. Steven had turned their perfect plan upside down. The victory they thought was theirs was only the setup for their own downfall. And as he leaned back, hands folded, the young man realized. Everything he thought he controlled was under Steven Seagal's watchful eye. The game had only just begun. Who will fall first, the fraud gang, or the board members blinded by greed? Steven didn't rush. He never did. He let the room's energy swell, let the smug confidence of the young man and the greedy board members fill the air. Then, calmly, he spoke. You think this is over, he said, voice low but steady, because you believed the papers, the signatures, and his confidence. But the truth has a way of catching up. The young man's smug smile faltered slightly. He leaned forward, trying to maintain control. What do you mean? You had no way of stopping. Stop talking, Steven interrupted softly, his eyes sharp, unyielding. I let you think you were winning. I let you feel clever. And you were, until now. From under his desk, Steven retrieved a folder, evidence meticulously collected over months. He spread it across the table. Recorded phone calls capturing every plan and every secret conversation of the board and the young man. Transaction logs showing unauthorized transfers. Altered contracts tracing back to the fraud attempt. The board members froze. The young man's face drained of color. Just then, the office doors burst open. Uniformed police officers entered, their presence instant and commanding. The young man stammered, pointing at Steven. He knew everything. Steven's eyes didn't leave him. Calm. Cold. Precise. Yes, he said simply. That's why you're caught. Panic erupted among the fraud gang. Phones rang, murmurs spread, whispers of impossible and how did he, filled the room. The board members tried to argue, to deflect blame, to manipulate. Every lie, every excuse, every attempt crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The young man slumped into his chair, realization hitting him like a punch he couldn't block. He had thought he was the mastermind, that he was the one controlling the game. But Steven had been watching, planning, and waiting from the very beginning. One by one, the police cuffed the corrupt board members. The young man's smug confidence evaporated entirely, replaced with shock and regret. Steven watched silently, letting the arrest speak louder than any words. The lesson was clear: deceit can only travel so far. Precision, patience, and truth always prevail. And in that office, as the criminals were led away, Steven's calm presence reminded everyone who truly held power, not through force, but through strategy, integrity, and time. The office was quiet now, except for the soft shuffle of police boots as the last of the fraud gang and corrupt board members were escorted out. The tension that had gripped the room for hours began to lift, replaced by a mixture of relief, awe, and something else: respect. Steven Seagal stood in the center of the office, calm, composed, and utterly unshaken. His hands were folded behind his back as he surveyed his staff, who had been silent witnesses to the entire unfolding drama. The young man, once brimming with overconfidence, now sat quietly in a corner, humbled and speechless. Steven's gaze swept across the room. "A company is not built on shortcuts or fear," he began, his voice steady, commanding attention without a hint of arrogance. "It is protected by truth, by integrity, and by the people who uphold those values every single day." The staff looked at each other, nodding. Their loyalty had been tested. Their respect for Steven had grown immeasurably. A senior employee stepped forward, voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You're the only boss we trust," he said. Steven allowed a faint smile. He didn't need to boast, didn't need to gloat. His calm presence was enough. His actions had spoken louder than words, proving that patience, strategy, and principle always win over greed and deceit. He continued, turning slightly to the young man, who had been silent the entire time. "You believed you were clever, that you could outsmart me. But the truth doesn't need cleverness. The truth only needs time." The young man lowered his gaze, finally understanding the lesson he had failed to learn. Steven then addressed his staff again. "Remember this day. It is not about showing strength. It is about standing firm, observing, and acting with patience. Fraud may be loud and bold, but it is temporary. Integrity is enduring." The staff, moved by the words and the demonstration, began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, until the office was filled with the sound of genuine appreciation. They had witnessed not just a victory over deceit, but a masterclass in leadership. Steven allowed himself a small, controlled nod. The camera, if there had been one, would have caught his calm, strong, victorious expression. There was no arrogance, no rage, only quiet mastery. And as the echoes of applause faded, one line seemed to hang in the air, resonant and unforgettable. "Fraud needs secrecy. Truth only needs time." The lesson was clear: power without integrity is fragile, and patience coupled with principle is unstoppable. The news of what had unfolded in Steven Seagal's office didn't stay contained for long. Within hours, the videos, documents, and eyewitness accounts spread across social media platforms, corporate news outlets, and messaging channels. Millions watched, fascinated by the calm precision with which a seasoned businessman had dismantled a calculated corporate fraud. The young man, once confident and smug, was now a quiet figure in the background. He had learned, far too late, that overconfidence without awareness is a dangerous thing. The corrupt board members, who had laughed and plotted behind Steven's back, were publicly exposed and facing serious legal consequences. The corporate world buzzed with shock and admiration, dissecting how a single man had outmaneuvered an entire group of schemers with patience, intelligence, and principle. Inside the office, Steven gathered his loyal staff for a final meeting. Their eyes followed him, wide with respect and gratitude. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. "A real company," Steven began, "is protected not by clever tricks, not by threats, and not by shortcuts. It is protected by truth, by diligence, by integrity, and by every person who refuses to compromise these values, even when the pressure is strongest." The staff stood in silence for a moment, absorbing his words. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to applaud. First quietly, then louder, until the office was alive with admiration and unity. A senior employee stepped forward, voice steady but emotional. "You're the only boss we trust." Steven smiled faintly, a small, confident nod. "Thank you," he said. "Remember this day. Fraud may appear bold, loud, and unstoppable, but it cannot survive scrutiny. Truth doesn't need to rush. Truth doesn't need tricks. It only needs time." He looked around at the team, his expression calm, measured, victorious. Outside, the city continued to move, unaware of the quiet storm that had just passed in this one office, yet inside, a lesson had been etched forever. The young man and the board members had been caught, not through force, but through patience, foresight, and unwavering principle. Steven Seagal had proven that even in a world obsessed with shortcuts and deception, integrity is the ultimate power. And as the staff dispersed, inspired and reassured, one message lingered for all who would hear it. Fraud needs secrecy. Truth only needs time. If you believe integrity, patience, and truth are stronger than greed and deceit, type respect in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage, strategy, and victory like this one.